Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A thank you to the Soil Association for inviting me today. I'm passionate about crop nutrition, so any opportunity I have to talk to people or to be challenged about crop nutrition, I welcome. So thank you to the Soil Association and to Astrid for the organisation. What I'd like to do for the next 20 minutes is I've got a brief introduction to headland crop nutrition. I want to talk a bit about crop nutrition, how I see its importance in today's world and tomorrow's world. And then I've got a bit on the basic science, putting the basic science into perspective. So that's the first bit of the presentation. The next bit is I want to go and look at plant requirements. You mentioned the concept of essentiality. It sounds a bit grand. Yeah, here? Yeah, sorry. So I want to talk about the concepts of essentiality, and then I want to look at photosynthesis and find out where those essential elements fit into the process. I'll then talk a bit about element ratios in plants, soil interactions. Mike talked about soil interaction in his presentation. I've got some information on specific plant requirements, and then I'll look at the practical aspects, the diagnostics, soil and tissue analyses, and visual symptoms, and then I'm going to bring it all together in a summary and conclusion. Okay, just a bit about headland crop nutrition. Am I close enough? Yeah. Just a bit about headland crop nutrition. We are involved in a number of crop areas. I'm involved about 95% of my time in crop nutrition and specifically in foliar nutrition. So we're not involved in bagged nitrogen, bagged phosphorus, bagged potassium. We're involved in foliar nutrition. The other point I would make is that we're involved in micronutrients. Primarily involved in micronutrients, though not totally, because 40% of our products contain some of the macronutrients. But the emphasis in our business is with regard to micronutrients. And just so there's no scope for any confusion, micronutrients are synonymous with trace elements. And the reason I make that point is that on the organic compendium, I think there's a specific section on trace elements. So trace elements synonymous with micronutrients. We're also becoming increasingly involved with biostimulants. Now that might not be a word that you're particularly familiar with. Within the EU, there is a movement afoot to bring in an approval and registration scheme for biostimulants. The problem is, that at this moment in time, I don't think there's an actual clear definition about what biostimulants are. But I think what it will include is aspects like compounds that have a physiological effect on the plant, compounds that reduce the effect of abiotic stress, and by abiotic stress I mean things like waterlogging, drought, cold, etc. And also they may have a benefit in terms of the nutrient profile of a plant. And one of the prime candidates within that registration approval scheme, I believe, will be seaweed extracts. And I've got a blatant advert there. I make no apology for that at all. I advertise Headland Lion. That's a 95% ascophyllum seaweed extract. And over the past 3 months, we have been given organic status in all the states of America, including California. And California have very, very stringent regulations. So if there's anyone here from producer studies within the Soil Association, I will be knocking on your door within the next few weeks and demanding that that goes on your list. So, where do we stand at 2013? This is headland crop nutrition globally. And the countries in green are the countries that we're actually involved with commercial activity. And the countries in brown are the countries that we've got registrations in place waiting to come through. So we cover a number of countries throughout the world. So just a bit about crop nutrition as I see it, the importance on a global scale, population growth to 2050, and perhaps the lower nutritional value of food. This is some information from the IFPRI, which if I remember rightly is International Food Policy Research Institute. And they publish data on what's called the GHI, the Global Hunger Index. And that's based on 3 criteria: under 5 mortality, prevalence of underweight in children, and proportion of undernourished. So the higher the figure, obviously the higher the bar, then the worse the hunger in that particular region. So for example, South Asia, it stands now at 22.5, which is, I think the terminology is extremely appalling. That's the terminology that the IFPRI use. So although we've sat here and had a very nice lunch and presumably a very nice breakfast, hunger is an issue in the rest of the world. The other issue that I think is very important, and we've probably seen this ad nauseum over the last few years, is projections by the United Nations that by 2050 we'll have 9 billion people on the planet. I was speaking to somebody recently and they said that the FAO have actually upped their population projections to 10 billion. And if you look at the projections, some projections, to 2100, I won't be around then. I don't think anyone in this room will be around then, but I think they're talking about up to and above 20 billion people on the planet. The final slide to put crop nutrition in perspective is some work from the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, and looks at the average mineral content in selected vegetables. And between 1914 to 1997, that has reduced. Now, I don't know how reproducible that work is. I don't know how strong it is, and whether it's reflected in other staple foods. But that is just some information from the USDA on specific vegetables. Okay. So I've looked at it, the importance as I see it of crop nutrition on a global scale. I've looked at population growth, and I've looked at possibly the lower nutritional value of food, which I think makes correct crop nutrition particularly important. Just a bit about the basic science. It's a huge subject area, absolutely huge subject area, but it's actually quite well researched. I bought myself a library at home of books, textbooks and information. Very sad individual actually, but I bought myself a lot, and I've spent £1,500 of my own money over the last few years buying these textbooks. And if anyone's got a textbook that I haven't got, I will be very, very aggrieved. But it's not only to show them a very sad individual, it's to show you that there is that much information out there in the public domain. It's a very, very well researched area. I find it fascinating, but it's extremely complex, extremely complex. And the final point I would make, you cannot study, in my view, and I think Mike alluded to this, you cannot study, in my view, crop nutrition. You've got to be aware of the soil, and you've got to be aware of the benefits of organic matter. And I think farmers are losing sight of that particular fact. Okay, this is really the second part of the presentation, and I want to look at what I've grandly called the concept of essentiality. I want to look at photosynthesis, and I want to look at where those essential elements fit, because photosynthesis is a base process on which we all depend. We would not be here if it wasn't for that base process. And then I'm going to have a look at element ratios in plants, soil interactions, and again it's something that Mike alluded to in his presentation, and then look at specific plant requirements by species and by diagnostics. Okay? Okay, so let me get back on track now. Yeah. I just like to walk around. I've got so much nervous energy. So what I'd like to do now, we've decided that I've drawn it out of you. There are 17 essential elements. Okay, now what I want to do now is find where these essential elements fit in the most important process on the planet. That's what photosynthesis is in its most basic form. It's carbon dioxide and water coming together to make carbohydrates. That's a really basic bit of information. What I want to do now, if any of you got sunglasses, put them on now, because there's some fairly stunning graphics coming up here. But please don't be overawed by the graphics, because basically what I'm doing is using the graphics as a scaffold onto which to put various bits of information. So that's a very complicated slide showing photosynthesis. And what I'm going to do now is show where the different elements fit. On the left-hand side, ATP, that's this side of the slide, that's where carbohydrates are made finally at this side. So what I want to do is go to the other side first of all and highlight PS2. Now that's photosystem 2. There are two photosystems in photosynthesis, and that's where the chlorophyll is. All right, so the green stuff you see in plants, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. If we go to photosystem 2, chlorophyll, and again, Mike referred to this in his presentation, chlorophyll contains a central atom of magnesium with 4 nitrogen atoms round it. So 2 of the essential elements are in there. The next bit of the process is called the oxygen evolving process. And in my view, that's the most important part of photosynthesis. Because you're sitting here, I've already said you've had a nice lunch and a nice breakfast. You're breathing in air. And the air comes from this oxygen evolving complex in plants. Because what happens is water's split and oxygen's given off. So I think that's one of the most important parts of the process. What's in the oxygen evolving complex? We've got manganese. There are 4 atoms of manganese. There's chlorine and there's calcium. So five of the essential elements we've seen in here. The energy then goes down what's called a transfer chain, and the next bit on the transfer chain is something called plastocyanin, which is based on copper and sulfur. So by my calculation, we've now got 7 of the most essential elements in this process. We've also got ATP, phosphate, and we've got another electron acceptor called ferredoxin, which contains iron and sulfur. So how many is that? 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Is that 10? Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? 9. We can add potassium, we can add moly, and we can add zinc, because zinc is very important for capture of carbohydrates in C4 plants. We've got carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in that process. The 2 that are missing are nickel. And I think that might play a part in the process by converting some form of nitrogen into that's assimilable by the plant. The one I cannot find a position for is boron, although I do know that boron deficiency affects the efficiency of photosynthesis. Okay? That is the bit of information that I talked about when this gadget went off. It was done in the States in the early 80s. So you're looking at, it's a comparison of the number of atoms in a plant compared to 1 atom of moly. I am not saying there's only 1 atom of molybdenum in the plant. I'm saying it's a ratio. And the final bit of information I want to show you before I go into some practical examples is something called the Mulders chart. Have any of you come across this before? I've seen some nods and I've seen some shakes. This is called the Mulders chart, and what it relates to, and I'll just let you get your mind around it first of all, I'll let you get your mind around the circle. What it relates to is the antagonism of certain elements by other elements. Okay, so you've got the elements round the edge of the circle, and you've got all these lines across the circle. And if you look at the biggest antagonist, the biggest elemental antagonist there is, calcium, you'll see there's a straight line from calcium to zinc, to manganese, to boron, to phosphorus, to iron. Now, it might not be specifically calcium, but it might be calcium's mediating the pH. It might be that calcium carbonate, zinc, for example, occludes onto the surface of calcium carbonate. But calcium is a major antagonist. And the other antagonist is potentially phosphate as well. So, we've struggled through, or I've struggled through, looking at the concept of essentiality. There are 17 essential elements. We've looked at where they fit in the most important process on the planet. We've looked at the ratios in plants, and it's not all about nitrogen. It's also about molybdenum as well. Little moly is very, very important. We've looked at soil interactions. What I'm going to do now is look at specific plant requirements by species and by diagnostics and visual symptoms. 5 minutes? Are you sure? This is a paper that was given at the International Plant Nutrition Colloquium in California in 2009. Every 4 years, the great and the good, the scientists, the academics, get together internationally, and this took place in 2009. The last one, 2013, took place in Istanbul, and there were some absolutely superb bits of information and very relevant and very practical bits of information that were presented. So what I'm going to do is just summarise what Professor Blevins said in his paper with regard to specific plant requirements. And the first thing he mentioned is that protein synthesis requires high levels of potassium. So in high protein crops, potassium is crucial. An example he gave was of soybeans. Cell walls of grasses, and we're talking probably wheat and barley, contain less pectin. With pectin, you have an interlocking between boron and calcium. So logically, wheat and barley require less boron than other broadleaf crops. I'm not saying they don't need boron, it's one of the 17 essential elements, but it needs less. Third bullet point, C4 plants can be divided into categories. Some need more manganese, some need more magnesium. Do we all know what a C4 plant is? I've seen some nods and some shakes as well again. There are three photosynthetic systems. One's called the CAM system, largely irrelevant in terms of arable crops. There's a C3 system and a C4 system. The C4 plants that we have anything to do with are maize and probably peripherally sorghum and millet. They're C4 plants. And what C4 plant is, it can make better use of the heat and the radiation than a C3 plant. So wheat and oilseed rape and potatoes are all C3 plants. Maize is a one C4 plant that we cultivate in this country.
What about the C4?
I think they're threes. You might. There are some really odd plants among C4s. There's maize, millet, sorghum, Bermuda grass, and some other really esoteric. Don't put me on the spot like that. I've got a tendency enough of you. No. And the other one, soybeans, fixed nitrogen and manganese. Right, I'm moving on this. I've only got a few left. I want to give you some practical examples now, some practical examples of situations that I've come across in the UK. I don't know if anyone is from the East Riding of Yorkshire, God's country, but this is a picture taken in East Riding of Yorkshire in 2010. There was a lot of sulphur deficiency around that year, and this is an extreme example. So what I would suggest is that all that field is showing sulphur deficiency, but this is showing it to an extreme level. And if you look at the individual plants, very, very typical of sulphur deficiency, the tramlining effect, the dark green and the light green. So I did a tissue analysis on this particular field, on this particular crop, and you see that, unsurprisingly, sulphur is very, very low. Nitrogen's okay and phosphorus is okay. But what is the point? What is the point in having decent levels of nitrogen and phosphorus when we haven't got decent levels of sulphur, potassium, magnesium? Absolutely no point at all. And I seem to remember talking to the farmer about this, and he said to me something like, well, I banged on plenty of nitram. You know, the message is that nutrition is about a balance. That's the crop as it got to harvest. You'll see at the back there's a better area. It's a very, very poor area. And then I went back, I know it's back to front, but I went back just out of interest's sake and did a soil analysis. And if you look at the sulphur, the levels of sulphur, they're absolutely down on the ground. Absolutely down on the ground. This is of slightly academic interest, really. I was called to look at this field again in 2010. And you'll see that the barley is growing in that particular area. In this area, what we've got growing is annual meadowgrass. That is just pure annual meadowgrass. There's about an acre of that. And I was told by the agronomist that it's not pH, so I started scratching my head and thinking, well, okay, we'll do a soil analysis. It was pH, 4.3. 4.3, horrific. Now, I don't think pH per se was a problem there. What I think was a problem was aluminium toxicity. Because as the pH drops, aluminium becomes much more available. So although pH might be the cause of it as such, or the instigating factor, I think it's probably more likely to be aluminium toxicity. And of course, I didn't do an aluminium test. I could have done, but I didn't. And the final 3 slides are, again, I just hate seeing situations like that. That was a couple of fields in North Yorkshire on the Easingwold Stillington Road. There's a lot of manganese in that area. So I called in to see the farmer to take some photos, and that's his barley. Sorry, that's his barley. That's his wheat. And I did a soil analysis later on in the year, and you see the manganese levels are down at 13. The sulphur's not brilliant either. There is a statement on there that boron a priority for treatment, but they made that statement on that analysis because it was oilseed rape that I took the soil sample from. Okay, just to summarise then, I did a brief introduction of headland. I talked about crop nutrition in today's world, the basic science. I've looked at plant requirements, and to bring it together in a summary and conclusion, my view is that crop nutrition is absolutely basic to food production. And I've quoted there some words that a very learned plant nutritionist gave me 2 or 3 years ago, and he said you just cannot get any more basic than crop nutrition. And if you think again of that slide I showed on photosynthesis, the most important, the most essential process in the world, and think where all the different elements fit, I think he's right to say that crop nutrition is absolutely basic. I've come to accept that the science is complex. It's driven me nuts absolutely driven me nuts trying to understand the science at times. So I've just given up. It's really is very, very complex, but nevertheless, I think you can take out some basic principles from it and use them in practice. And the final point I'd make is that with population growth projected to rise rapidly, I think crop nutrition needs to be given far more attention, but within a holistic approach. And Mike again mentioned a lot of other areas that I think need to be. They're all tangential. They all need to be brought together in a holistic approach. So, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry about the technology. If anyone has any questions that they want to email me, then that's my email address. So feel free to go ahead and do that.